Every Tuesday morning for 3 straight weeks, I stood in my driveway staring at the same disaster. Garbage everywhere. Coffee grounds splattered across 20 feet of pavement. Banana peels draped over my mailbox like some kind of twisted party decoration. And the smell, rotting food mixed with motor oil, hit you like a wall the second you stepped outside. But here's the part that nobody warned me about. It wasn't raccoons. It wasn't wind. It was my HOA president, deliberately ramming her white Lexus into my trash can like it had personally offended her. And she had absolutely no idea that the guy she was messing with spent 20 years mastering the kind of electrical work that requires you to understand exactly how much force it takes to stop something cold. She was about to get the most expensive physics lesson of her life. My name is Lucian, and 2 years before any of this happened, I made what I thought was a smart decision. After losing my wife to cancer, I packed up everything and moved my 16-year-old daughter Savannah to a quiet suburban neighborhood called Willowbrook Estates. Good schools. Clean streets. The kind of place where a grieving teenager could finish her senior year without the world caving in around her. I was 42, a union electrician with calloused hands and wire-stained fingernails, and I genuinely believed that a stable neighborhood was exactly what we needed to start healing. I was wrong in ways I couldn't have imagined. The HOA president was a woman named Bethany. 58 years old, silver hair that somehow never moved even on windy days, designer cardigans that probably cost more than my truck payment, and a white Lexus so pristine you could eat off the hood. She'd been running that 127-home community for 8 years, long enough to stop thinking of it as a neighborhood and start thinking of it as her personal kingdom. You could hear her coming from 3 houses away, those designer heels clicking on pavement with the kind of deliberate rhythm that puts your whole body on alert. Most of the neighbors had learned to treat that sound as an early warning system. The first time it happened, I thought it was an accident. Standard Tuesday morning. I put my regulation black bin at the curb exactly where the HOA guidelines said to put it, dropped Savannah at school, grabbed coffee, and headed to the job site. When I came home that afternoon, it looked like a garbage bomb had gone off in my driveway. Broken glass catching the afternoon sun. Coffee grounds scattered everywhere. That smell hitting me before I even got out of my truck. I spent 30 minutes cleaning it up, which made me late for work, which my boss noted without much sympathy. My neighbor Mrs. Cecilia appeared at her fence, voice barely above a whisper. She told me she'd seen the whole thing from her kitchen window. Bethany had driven her Lexus directly into my trash can, backed up, hit it again, and then just sat there watching the mess spread across my driveway before driving away with what Mrs. Cecilia described as a satisfied smile. That detail, the sitting and watching part, turned my stomach. This wasn't some accidental sideswipe. This was deliberate, calculated, and she enjoyed it. Week 2 brought the same destruction, plus a $75 citation in my mailbox for unsightly debris compromising community standards. Think about that for a second. She destroys your property, then fines you for the mess she created. Week 3, she was walking my property line with a measuring tape, documenting violations. Grass a fraction of an inch too tall. Garden hose visible from the street. Mailbox numbers slightly off-center. Meanwhile, Savannah started leaving for school earlier every day just to avoid seeing the garbage explosions. My boss was issuing warnings about tardiness. My daughter's college application deadlines were creeping closer while her home life turned into a war zone. By week 4, I'd installed a security camera, and that's when everything became impossible to ignore. Tuesday morning, 6:47 a.m. Bethany's Lexus came around the corner at exactly 15 miles per hour. Fast enough to do damage, controlled enough to reverse and do it again. My bin exploded like a piñata. Contents arced across the driveway in a perfect destructive spread. And then she just sat there. Engine running. 30 seconds of admiring her work. Then she drove off. That night, I started digging into the real story of Willowbrook Estates, and what I found made my blood run cold. 7 families had moved away from that neighborhood in the past 3 years. Every single one of them had gone through the same pattern of escalating harassment. And every single one of them shared something in common. They were minorities, single parents, or newcomers who didn't know their rights. Bethany wasn't just being difficult. She was running a deliberate campaign to push out anyone who didn't fit her version of what this neighborhood should look like. That's when something shifted in me. Not anger, exactly. Something quieter and more focused. See, an electrician's whole job is understanding systems. You learn early on that every problem has a logical solution. You just have to understand the system well enough to find the right approach. And what I was looking at was a system, Bethany's system, that had been running unopposed for years because nobody had taken the time to truly understand how it worked. I was about to change that. First, I studied the HOA bylaws the same way I'd study an electrical schematic before a major installation. 3 hours of reading on a Tuesday night revealed something useful. The waste management rules were deliberately vague, lots of subjective language about community standards, without any specific measurements. So I grabbed my measuring tape and took a walk through the neighborhood after dark. 23 houses on my street. All of them had what you could call identical violations to mine. Same bin placement, same curb distance. But only 5 families had ever received citations. Mrs. Cecilia, the Rodriguezes, the Washingtons, a family called the Kowalskis who'd fled the year before, and me. The pattern landed like a hand on a live wire. While I was investigating, I also discovered something that should have been obvious. Bethany's own property had 17 violations of the very rules she was enforcing against everyone else. Unauthorized rose trellis, decorative mailbox, painted address numbers, all requiring architectural review board approval, which meant approval from herself. I documented everything with time-stamped photos and quietly started reaching out to the other targeted families. Mrs. Cecilia invited me into her kitchen, where the smell of jasmine tea couldn't quite cover the anxiety in her voice. She told me Bethany had threatened to fine her for wind chimes, calling them Asian decorations that didn't fit community standards. The Rodriguezes shared their own stories in hushed voices by their mailbox, Mr. Rodriguez's carpenter hands trembling slightly as he described random property inspections and his kids feeling unwelcome in the neighborhood they called home. Now I had everything I needed to play this the right way. I filed a formal complaint against Bethany using her own citation format, professional photos and all, and requested an architectural review board meeting for her unauthorized decorations. The beauty of this move was that she couldn't approve her own violations without committing fraud. Wednesday night, I watched through my living room window as Bethany worked by flashlight at 2 in the morning, frantically dismantling her garden like someone trying to erase evidence before a search warrant arrived. The rose trellis disappeared. The decorative mailbox became plain black metal. You could hear her panicked breathing carrying across the silent street as she wrestled with heavy garden ornaments. What she didn't know was that Mrs. Cecilia had been recording the whole thing from her kitchen window. Thursday morning, Bethany tried to call an emergency HOA board meeting, forgetting that the bylaws required 72 hours notice. When I showed up with Mrs. Cecilia and her smartphone footage, plus the Rodriguezes as additional witnesses, she had to cancel entirely. Her hands were visibly shaking as she shuffled papers. Then Friday came with hastily revised bylaws that tried to grandfather in decorative elements installed before 2015. Except Mrs. Cecilia's timestamp videos proved Bethany's rose trellis went up last spring. Her attempted cover-up had failed, and in her panic, she'd accidentally given me something valuable. The new rules included a clause about infrastructure modifications for security purposes, requiring only basic notification. She had just handed me legal cover for exactly what I was planning to install. But that same weekend, my boss pulled me aside at the job site. 14 late arrivals in a month. Fix whatever's happening at home, or we have a real problem. I drove home thinking about Savannah stress-eating burned cookies and hiding in her room on Tuesday mornings. I thought about college application deadlines and a 16-year-old girl who'd already lost her mother watching her new home become a battlefield. Bureaucratic countermoves weren't enough. Sometimes you don't rewire the whole system. Sometimes you just upgrade the component that keeps failing. And when someone keeps ramming your property with 4,000 pounds of German engineering, you install something designed to teach physics lessons the hard way. I drove to Morrison Construction Supply on Wednesday morning. Jake Morrison had been a union brother for 15 years, The kind of guy who understands that residential projects sometimes call for creative problem solving. I explained what I needed. Something that looks exactly like a standard trash bin but can handle significant vehicle impact. He raised an eyebrow. How significant are we talking? 4,000 pounds at 15 miles per hour. His grin said everything. You're talking about stopping a car with what looks like a garbage can. He walked me through the options. Polymer concrete or steel reinforced core. Both would stop a freight train. For my specific situation, he recommended a steel rebar core with a polymer concrete shell, solid enough to transfer impact force directly into bedrock through deep foundation anchoring. A 4,000-pound luxury sedan hitting reinforced concrete anchored 4 feet down would experience what physicists call an immovable object scenario. We ran the numbers. 80 pounds of steel rebar for bags of polymer concrete, an industrial-grade plastic shell identical to every other bin in the neighborhood. Total cost, $340. Now here's where the story got dangerous again, because Bethany wasn't done escalating. Week 7, I opened certified mail to find a notice of property lien, $1,200 in accumulated violations, with foreclosure proceedings threatened within 10 days. The charges were pure fiction. Backdated violations attributed to previous tenants I'd never met. She was literally trying to steal my house through paperwork fraud. When Savannah found me staring at those documents, she asked what was wrong. I told her the truth. Bethany was threatening to take our home. The fear that crossed my daughter's face, identical to the expression she'd worn during her mother's final hospital days, broke something open in me. Her college applications sat unfinished on the kitchen table. I was done playing defense. That same evening, my neighbors showed up at my door. Mrs. Cecilia, the Rodriguezes, the Washingtons, all of them holding identical certified mail. Bethany had filed liens against every family who'd helped me. All of them. Same threats, same 10-day deadline. The paperwork was criminally sloppy, wrong property descriptions, impossible violation dates, forged signatures. In her rush to terrorize everyone simultaneously, she'd committed multiple felonies. But the immediate damage was real. Maria Rodriguez was quietly crying. Mr. Washington, a retired veteran with a Purple Heart in his living room, spoke with barely controlled fury about 30 years of serving a country whose freedoms were now being stripped away by a suburban dictator with a clipboard. 7 families had already fled rather than fight. We were supposed to be next. Not this time, I said. She picked the wrong neighborhood. Friday night, while Bethany was at her weekly dinner club, I started the installation. The hydraulic post-hole digger hit bedrock at 46 inches, exactly as surveyed. Saturday, steel framework assembly, 8 pieces of half-inch rebar welded into a grid built to handle seismic forces. Mrs. Cecilia brought coffee and kept watch. Sunday afternoon, the concrete pour. Polymer concrete flowing around the steel framework, achieving compression strength that exceeded military bunker specifications. Monday evening, I fitted the plastic shell over the foundation, indistinguishable from every other bin in Willowbrook Estates. Anyone looking at it from the street would see a standard garbage can. What they wouldn't see was the 800 pounds of steel-reinforced concrete anchored to geological formations that hadn't shifted in millennia. Tuesday morning arrived. 8 months of planning, compressed into one moment. 6:47 a.m. I'm at my living room window, coffee in hand, heart hammering. Mrs. Cecilia was at her kitchen window, smartphone ready. The Rodriguezes were in their driveway, pretending to do yard work. Mr. Washington was on his porch with his morning paper, Purple Heart visible on his bathrobe. The whole neighborhood was positioned and waiting. Bethany's Lexus rounded the corner with the quiet confidence of someone who had never once faced consequences. 15 miles per hour. Same speed, same trajectory, 12 weeks in a row. In her mind, this was just Tuesday's routine destruction. 30 pounds of plastic garbage container about to explode across my driveway in satisfying chaos. The impact lasted maybe half a second. But physics doesn't rush for anyone. Her front bumper struck dead center. The sound that followed was nothing like the satisfying crunch of shattering plastic she expected. It was metal screaming, glass exploding outward in crystalline fountains. steam erupting from a ruptured cooling system. The Lexus stopped instantly, not gradually, not with a skid, but instantly, as if she'd driven into the side of a mountain. Because essentially she had. My installation didn't move. Not 1 inch. The airbag deployed with a sound like a gunshot that echoed off every garage door on the street. The hood folded like origami, pushing the grille straight through the radiator. Both headlights were gone. Antifreeze and motor oil began spreading beneath the engine in slow rainbow puddles that reflected shattered glass like broken promises. The sharp smell of hot metal and automotive fluids reached me even through the window. 30 seconds of absolute silence followed. Even the birds stopped. Bethany's door opened with the grinding protest of bent metal. She emerged looking like someone who had just had a very violent argument with a geological formation. Blood from her nose where the airbag hit. Designer cardigan hanging torn. Silver hair completely undone. She stood there looking at my trash receptacle, pristine, upright, not a scratch on it, as if it had personally violated the laws of nature. She walked toward it on unsteady legs. Reached out with trembling fingers. Pressed her hands against the surface and felt what her brain refused to believe. Solid concrete. "This is," she whispered. "This is concrete." The moment she understood she'd been outsmarted by the person she'd spent months trying to destroy was visible in real time on her face. Complete and total defeat. That's when I stepped outside with my most concerned neighbor expression. "Bethany, are you okay?" I heard a terrible crash. Mrs. Cecilia was already dialing 911, reporting a single-vehicle accident with an injured driver. The next hour was extraordinary. 2 police cruisers, an ambulance, a tow truck. Officer Martinez asked me what happened. I explained with genuine-looking puzzlement that from inside I'd heard a loud bang and come out to find this situation. When he asked what could have caused so much damage, I pointed at my trash receptacle and said I honestly couldn't explain it. I mentioned I'd upgraded to a heavy-duty model after vandalism problems. The receipt Jake had prepared described it as a residential waste receptacle, heavy-duty model. Technically accurate in every way that mattered. Bethany, meanwhile, was telling the second officer about booby traps and neighbor conspiracies and how I'd deliberately installed something to destroy her car. Which, in a spectacular act of self-destruction, caused Officer Martinez to ask her directly whether she'd been intentionally targeting my trash can. The color drained from her face as she realized she'd just admitted premeditation on the record. Mrs. Cecilia appeared with her manila folder. 12 weeks of security footage. Bethany accelerating into the bins. Reversing for second impacts. Sitting in her car, watching the mess spread before driving away with a smile. The insurance adjuster, a guy I'd actually worked with on commercial jobs, spent 20 minutes examining the wreckage in obvious disbelief. In 20 years of adjusting claims, he'd never seen a garbage bin total a luxury sedan. Then came the moment that ended it financially. Based on evidence of intentional property damage rather than an accident, the claim was denied pending criminal investigation. Intentional acts exclusions in insurance policies void coverage for deliberate destruction. Bethany's $15,000 claim became legally worthless the moment she admitted on the record what she'd been doing. But a cornered narcissist doesn't accept defeat. She escalates. Within 48 hours, she'd called my employer claiming I was stealing electrical materials for unauthorized home projects, using details she'd gathered during months of surveillance to make it sound credible. She filed comprehensive city complaints claiming I was running an unlicensed electrical business out of my home. She targeted the Rodriguezes, the Cecilias, and the Washingtons with fabricated code violations and false reports. The Washingtons received anonymous CPS reports claiming child neglect. The Rodriguezes were cited for unpermitted restaurant operations because they cook with aromatic spices. But every city inspection she triggered backfired. The inspector who spent 3 hours going through my electrical work told me it exceeded current safety codes by 200% and recommended my installations as a model for the county training program. The complaint source got flagged for filing false reports. And Jake Morrison called to warn me that Bethany had come into the supply store asking about sledgehammers, jackhammers, and chemical concrete dissolvers, anything that could destroy a reinforced installation. She'd even asked about explosives. Jake turned her away, but she was clearly spiraling. Then the Rodriguezes discovered something while going through property records. Bethany hadn't paid her own HOA dues in 8 months. The woman threatening everyone else with liens was $1,440 delinquent herself. And she'd been using HOA accounts to pay her personal attorney, labeling the payments as community legal expenses. Bank records showed HOA funds transferred directly to her personal account the same day her car insurance claim was denied. She had literally stolen community money to pay for the automotive destruction caused by her own harassment campaign. We had embezzlement. We had extortion through fraudulent assessments. We had filing false police reports. We had harassment of protected classes. We had enough to end her completely. The emergency HOA meeting happened on a Saturday morning. 89 homeowners packed into the community center. A local news reporter and camera crew in the back corner. Officer Martinez with his notepad near the front. A detective from financial crimes leaning against the wall with a briefcase full of subpoenaed bank records. Bethany arrived 20 minutes late wearing what looked like a hastily assembled outfit, her silver hair without its usual perfection, rental car keys trembling in her hands. Whatever armor she'd always worn had cracked. Mrs. Cecilia opened with parliamentary precision. We were there to address systematic harassment, financial crimes, and abuse of authority spanning 3 years. Bethany tried to interrupt, claiming the meeting was unauthorized. Mr. Washington stood up with military bearing and presented a petition signed by 73 residents, more than the required 2/3 majority to call an emergency homeowner meeting. Democracy, it turned out, was an immovable object too. I stood and presented the evidence in full. 12 weeks of security footage on a large screen. Financial records documenting $4,200 in embezzled HOA funds. The detective addressed the room formally, confirming active investigations into embezzlement, extortion, filing false police reports, and harassment of protected classes. Bethany was shrieking about conspiracies and booby traps when the reporter stepped forward. She introduced herself and her station, then mentioned they'd been researching Bethany's background and found identical harassment patterns in 2 previous neighborhoods, with sealed settlements from communities called Oakwood Estates and Riverside Commons. Would she like to comment? The room went completely silent. She had done this before. Different neighborhoods, same playbook. Same targeting of minorities and single parents. Same financial crimes. Same reign of terror until lawsuits forced her to move on. She was a professional community predator, and we just exposed her entire history in front of 89 homeowners and a news camera. The vote to remove her from all HOA positions was 87-2. Her 2 relatives voted against. Mrs. Cecilia was elected interim president by unanimous vote. As security escorted Bethany from the room, she turned and threatened to sue everyone for conspiracy, defamation, and property destruction. Detective Sullivan responded quietly, "You have the right to remain silent. I'd strongly suggest you use it." The handcuffs clicking shut echoed through the community center. 18 months in county jail for embezzlement and harassment. 3 years probation with mandatory anger management. $12,400 in restitution, which our community used to fund a new playground, built with materials chosen by Mr. Rodriguez and constructed with his carpenter hands. Her insurance never covered a dime of the Lexus repairs. Last I heard, she was driving a 10-year-old Honda and renting a studio apartment 3 towns away. 2 years later, Willowbrook Estates is a completely different neighborhood. Monthly HOA meetings became community potluck dinners. The Rodriguezes organize an annual block party. Property values are up 12%. The concrete trash receptacle is still standing exactly where I installed it. Savannah plants flowers around it every spring, and the neighborhood kids use it as home base for hide and seek. Turns out an immovable object makes excellent playground equipment. The morning I helped Savannah pack for her sophomore year, she stopped by that bin and looked at it for a moment. "You know what I figured out from all of this, Dad?" she said. "The best way to stop a bully isn't always fighting back. Sometimes it's just building something stronger than their ability to hurt you." I hugged my daughter, a civil engineering student now, planning to design infrastructure that serves communities instead of controlling them, and thought about what an electrician's training had actually given me. The skill to understand systems, the patience to find the right solution, and the knowledge that sometimes the strongest installations are the ones anchored deepest, the ones nobody can see, the ones that hold firm when everything else is being thrown at them. If you've ever dealt with an HOA running roughshod over your rights, here's what I want you to take away: document everything. Learn your bylaws better than they do. Connect with your neighbors, because collective knowledge is the most powerful tool you have. And remember, power like that only works when people don't know the rules. The moment residents understand what they're up against and start organizing, the whole dynamic shifts. If this story hit close to home, drop your own HOA nightmare in the comments. I guarantee some of you have stories that would make this one look mild. Hit that like button if this gave you something useful, and subscribe because we cover real homeowner conflicts where the good guys actually figure it out. Sometimes the best defense really is just building something stronger than their ability to hurt you.